But if you want to call him a bad guy because he's hard to deal with in negotiations, that's different. He probably was difficult to deal with. There's a reason. There's reasons why. Like Anthony Pettis, former champion, ended up leaving, going to PFL for a couple fights. In terms of the Francis Ngannou conversation and the Francis Ngannou talk, and I was listening to Morty Combat a little bit, and I just saw a highlight clip of it of Luke. He brought up a good point as well, and Luke basically said, that Francis is. People need to understand that with Francis, if you want to call him a bad guy for putting his hands on Dana White, I can see that. And that's kind of where I drew the line. But if you want to call him a bad guy because he's hard to deal with in negotiations, that's different. With Francis, I don't consider him a bad guy just because he is difficult to deal with in negotiations. And that is something that, like, there needs to be a separation between the two. It's never going to be easy to sit down with, whether it's Dana White, Joe Silva, Sean Shelby, whoever it was. I dealt directly with Joe Silva and with my manager, and he was pretty smooth to deal with. But when it came down to the nickels and dimes, like, hey, one extra, hotel room, or, one extra flight, or that's where he got offended. Like, no, we're not doing this. Like, you're not going to get this little bit of stuff out of it. Like, he was very difficult to deal with. But when you have someone like Francis, who is a heavyweight, there's not as many heavyweights. Lightweights are a dime a dozen. Like, Joe Silva would be like, hey man, like, I got 15 other lightweights that can replace you, just like replace anybody else in the top 15. Doesn't matter. Like, he just didn't, like, that's how Joe was. I mean, I've seen the way he's talked to multiple guys. I mean, the way he talked to me about Anthony Johnson when I was like trying to help manage Anthony Johnson a little bit. And Anthony didn't make weight. Man, he had some very harsh words. So, but that was Joe Silva. And I can imagine that if you have a heavyweight like Francis, who looks the part, has power, his fights are either really entertaining in terms of knockouts. I mean, the way he almost decapitated Alistair Overeem. I mean, he snapped his hand away back. The back of his skull touched his spine. It was nasty. And so that are the type of heavyweights that the UFC has always tried to cater to. They've always tried to bend over backwards for those heavyweights. So I could see Francis possibly being like, hey, I've got all the answers. I've got the power. I've got the look and the build. I've got a good story, and that is something that the UFC could use as a marketing tool. I just, when I look at it, I think to myself, I go, he probably was difficult to deal with. And by being difficult to deal with, it could have been very difficult, almost like as if he was aggressive, that he was not a kind person. That's how they'll always portray it. If you're the promoter, if you're the UFC, you're going to promote it like you're going to portray it as, yeah, he did this, he did that, he's not a good person. That's not the case, But I did like what Luke had to say. There's a difference between, like, hey, he put his hands on me in the office, and that to me that's not okay. Doesn't matter who it is. But where it does get a little dicey is that it's the separation between negotiations and that being considered not being a good person because you're hard to deal with, because you don't fall in line like the rest of the people that you have to work with there, or that you are working with, other fighters that you can control, and you can belittle their abilities by saying like, oh, well, you didn't do this. Oh, you didn't do that. And that's where I've seen that happen several times. I've seen fighters that have left the UFC and they chose to leave, and then the report comes out, the UFC says that they cut them. And they're like, no, they literally left for more money. It wasn't that they cut them. They could have stayed and made made a fraction of what they were making, or like, there's reasons why, like Anthony Pettis, former champion, ended up leaving, going to PFL for a couple fights. Other fighters have left and gone. I've been Shane Burgos. He left and went to the PFL for some fights. Sergio Pettis left, and went to Bellator. Like Brian Bader left. I mean, they had money left on the table. They could have stayed, but they chose to take the cash. But then when the release comes out as oh yeah, we cut them. That's not true. And so that's what I guess what I'm getting at is promoters have a way of flipping the script. Dana has a very good way of doing it. He flips the script and say like, yeah, we cut them, or he's very difficult to deal with. He asked for too much. Literally could have been like he wanted an extra hotel room, or he wanted one extra flight. Yeah, they just don't want to do that.